Great. Totally. Hello again. How you going?
Say something into the microphone. You can continue to chat amongst yourselves. A few more minutes, sorry. We're ready. Thanks everybody for waiting. Just a few housekeeping things. So, if you don't know where the bathrooms are, they're up in the front part of the building next to the NSP if you're going that way to your right, and there's a fully accessible toilet just past the kitchen to your right as well. Fire exits immediately through there or immediately out the way that you came. Tea, coffee, snacks up the back there, please help yourself. We'll finish 7:30, 8 o'clock at the latest, and it's getting live streamed, so you can watch the recording later or tell your friends too. So first I'll invite Gabby up to do an acknowledgement of country for us, and then we'll go straight into a short film that Drug Reporter made about the recent Harm Reduction International Conference.
Thank you all. So I would like to acknowledge that we are on Aboriginal land, the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I'd just like to pay respects to all elders past, present and emerging and any Aboriginal people here, and also acknowledge that sovereignty has never been ceded and that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land.
We say, Wiminjika, Gabamalamangil, Banabunyalamba, Warranjeri Balaknira, and Margagil Bill Nicholson. It's not just a broad welcome, it's welcoming you for a purpose. And the purpose I'm explaining now is a gathering here to talk about the very important social issues and healing of people.
I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Boonwurrung and Wurundjeri Woiwurrung peoples of the Kulin Nation. We pay our respects to elders past and present and note that sovereignty has never been ceded. We recognise that this land sings with 60,000 years of living culture and acknowledge that modern history is scarred by massacres, violent dispossession of land and the trauma of the stolen generation. When we stop to acknowledge the violence of colonialism in Australia and name systemic racism as the source of the violence experienced by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, we take a small step towards creating a more equitable world.
How you going, guys? My name is Ryan. I am one of the scholarship recipients for the HRI23, and in I think it was about 2019 when the HR21 was awarded to Victoria. I was pretty rapt. I spoke to Jane about it. As soon as I saw, obviously she already knew, but never in a million years did I think that a few years later that I would be actually attending not HR21 but HR23, which we got in lieu of HR21, which COVID stole from us all. So I just want to start with welcoming everyone and thanking you for attendance today and for turning up and making HR23, whether you were there virtually, whether you were there in present, or you were active on the wall, on the message boards, backwards and forwards. It all helped to make the event what it was. And I think as a community's perspective, it was great to be able to turn up to something and not be an outsider being there, so that you could be talking to like-minded people who all wanted to do the same thing. So, you know, we want to make people's lives easy, obviously reduce the harm, you know, legalise so many things that were legal for, you know, 100, 150, long before this country became what we know it as today. Now, my journey to get here today started as a peer network worker with HRVic back in Geelong, and that led on to a few other things. And harm reduction was never part of my my future. I had everything lined out of what I was going to do and how I was going to get there. And I'd already started probably 3 or 4 years beforehand to get to that starting point. And I got the job, or not the job, I got a position by leaving the library because I had to shift my car so I didn't get a parking fine. And I bumped into a couple of friends, and they were turning up to the Peer Network program, an induction session for a new cohort of peers who would bring their collective knowledge and reach to the community, and then be able to get as much help out there as we possibly could, and change a few things. So that opportunity led to a number of other opportunities, a few years later, I find myself here. This is my side gig, but I'm actually studying a Bachelor of Social Science at the moment at Swinburne, and I had a tumour identified late last year, and as part of that, I took some time off and to build a home and somewhere to go. So cognizant of the amount of ums that I'm saying, so I'll just try and ignore them. So as part of the talking points for tonight, I didn't actually write a speech. I just pulled apart one of my medication boxes that was empty and just wrote a few dot points on it, and I joked on the way in, speaking to Jane, said, hope that you've got some music which is going to, now that we've got sound problems, I think you're going to be in trouble, to sort of wind me up and get me off like at the academies, and bring on the next performing who's going to get a glass statuette. The highlight of my time there, apart from making new connections, not just in Australia or Victoria, but also overseas, not necessarily those who were present, but particularly those who were overseas, as a scholarship. As a scholarship recipient, I found that it was incumbent upon me to make an effort to help those people who couldn't get here for whatever reason, to make make them feel as if they were present and the things that they were saying on the wall were not being ignored, or that they were just part of a sideshow that hopefully someone would engage with them. So I spent a lot of my time backwards and forwards writing to and from people, and that worked out quite good for me because I've met people overseas that I've stayed in contact with, and hopefully some of them are watching on a live stream tonight. If not, I'm going to send them the link to the video, and I'm going to ask them questions at the end of it just to make sure that they watched it. Now, the highlight was on the second last day. There was a session on, I don't believe I'm going to use the correct terms, but basically how to set up a final communique of the outcome of HR23. And I see Penny in the audience, and I'm going to call myself a nerd. Everyone else took on all these sort of topics that were, quite grandiose and a bit more sexy, I suppose. And I ended up with a table that I thought was just going to be me. I expected that the person beside me was going to get up and walk off as well, but she stayed, which was great. And we just had a bit of a back and forth. Our question was, are we pulling our weight as Australia, as a country, in harm reduction, and are we doing enough for the people around us? So I gave a bit of a quick revisionist history of what we were. We were former colonial masters of Papua New Guinea. We've had interventions in the Solomon Islands, with East Timor. We were fundamental in not just the past atrocities that occurred in East Timor, but also, I think out of guilt, if nothing less, a responsibility to make East Timor an actual country. So, and today, supporting our rights, my right to use. My right to use. I was a drug addict because of personal issues to do with post-traumatic stress disorder, and I was suffering from that long before I knew what post-traumatic stress disorder was, beyond TV, anything to pop up on TV in a TV series. And the only way that I got to access any drugs that would treat, I'm an above-knee amputee, and I have chronic pain as a result of that. And to get treatment, because I had a past history as a drug addict, I was automatically put on, no, we can't give you any meaningful drugs that are going to treat any of your pain. You're going to have Panadine Forte and you're going to have Tramadol, which were contraindicated. They gave me serotonin syndrome, which caused seizures and a whole lot of other things. So I never had any rights. So the only ways that I managed to take incremental steps over the last 24 years has been as diversionary programs through the courts, which no one should have to get caught doing something illegal to support a habit to buy a drug that you should be prescribed by a doctor. And and finally, the medication. I've got a great doctor at the moment, and he's very supportive, not just of me and my personal situation, but the system as a whole and how it fails. And if it wasn't for having a bone tumour, I wouldn't be on the pain medication that I'm on now. And no one should have to get cancer to be able to get treatment and to be treated like a person, to remove the stigma of having an opioid substitution program. Now, I'm certainly not knocking anyone who's on opiate substitution therapy, but if you've got chronic pain, it's a little bit rich to turn around and say, well, we can't give you any meaningful pain management because we're afraid that, you're just going to be shoving it up your arm or giving it to someone else or doing the wrong thing. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because they don't give it to you, you go seeking it anyway because it's the only thing that's going to work. and it fails. So I'll just go on to the only I won't say it was an actual negative, but I saw this flyer just before I came up on stage, and it's the war on drugs equals a war on us. And as part of my course, a lot of the units that I study, they're to do with international law, counterterrorism, and international security. And a lot of our learning materials are directly from the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime. About 5 or 10 years ago, they realized that the war on drugs meant that we were combatants. So it would look bad for them to have people who are technically in the modern world unlawful combatants in a war on terror. There's a nexus between organised crime, transnational terrorist groups, and transnational organised crime in moving drugs as a logistical purpose around the world. And they've decided to, rather than take the war on drugs away, they've decided that, no, we'll just spin it. We'll keep it as a war on drugs, but we just won't call it that. So that's still what's going on right now. And just to, I've got the music, even though we've got no sound, I've got the music playing. One of the keynote speakers, former Prime Minister of New Zealand, Helen Clark, in her role for the United Nations when she was working as head of the harm reduction unit, I'm not calling it by its proper name, no doubt, but the problem is that they are a branch and subservient to the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime. If it's not a war on drugs, because we're just not calling it a war on drugs, we're still unlawful combatants to some degree, and that's not who we are. And none of us are carrying weapons, none of us are running down the street and taking people's lives. So it was a little bit, and most people wouldn't know, but it was a little bit tone deaf that we had someone that was in I'll give full deference to the fact that the role as harm reduction within a failed body that the United Nations has been, just like its successor, the League of Nations before it, that harm reduction isn't treated within the UN as a separate branch or as part of a health initiative. It's part of the Office of Drugs and Crime, and I find that staggering that in 2024, is it 2023, that that's where we are, even though 10 years ago they acknowledged that the war on drugs didn't work, it was wrong, and it was over. So I had a good time. I hope to hear from, I was a little bit scared when I actually got the final wrap-up of who was going to be speaking tonight, and that there was a Ralston Award winner on there, and that sort of made me a little bit nervous and shit. But thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the night and get something out of it. Anyone who's watching, either live streaming now or watching the recordings, yeah, reach out, help somebody and lift them up.
Ryan. Thanks, Ryan. We'll hear from Nick now. Are you ready? Yeah. Nick was one of our conference rapporteurs.
I'm just going to read from the paper. I'll try and make eye contact with the audience, but I can't guarantee it. So this is live streaming, yes? So it's a big shout out to all my fans watching, and that's not actually a joke. There are people watching. Anyway, oh, the camera's there. Hi. Yeah. Okay, so yes, my name is Nicolette. I am a current sex worker and injecting drug user of many indiscreet years, and many opportunities for the. I'm sorry, many thanks for the opportunity to speak here today and to share my perspective on the Harm Reduction Conference and the Melbourne Declaration. But before I launch into my very meaty critiques, I wanted to extend my genuine gratitude to Harm Reduction Victoria for facilitating the involvement of sex workers via Victoria's only peer-led sex worker organisation, Vixen, in the Harm Reduction Conference space. And as a result of your generosity and solidarity, and no doubt exploiting your professional networks, all Vixen staff had the opportunity to attend the conference and meet comrades and peers from around the globe and attend sessions related to their personal interests. And this might seem insignificant, so just to contextualize why this was so important. As someone who's had the dubious privilege of attending a number of international and regional conferences in a paid capacity over the past 20 plus years, too often our communities, that is sex workers, people who use currently illicit drugs, people living with HIV and or bloodborne viruses, and people with experiences of incarceration, are excluded from conference spaces due to the prohibitive cost of the entrance to the space, travel, accommodation, or simply not being in possession of some sheets of paper which are sewn together to create something known as a passport, which seems to be a collection of paper imbued with magical powers that either allow or stop someone from crossing some invisible lines known as borders. So I extend genuine thanks to Harm Reduction Victoria for facilitating sex worker involvement. And in crapping on you today, I just want to be clear that I'm speaking as an autonomous and current injecting drug user and street-based sex worker, but also as a person who is a conduit for my community. And the ideas that I'm going to share with you today are not just my ideas, but actually widely held within my social and subcultural milieu. Right. So when I reflect on inclusion and exclusion and who's permitted to participate in conference spaces, I recognize that the industry that surrounds and supports these big, slick international harm reduction and AIDS conferences only exists because we exist. If we didn't choose to use drugs, there wouldn't be an entire ecosystem of professionals with allegedly specialized skills who would be influencing dialogue and narrative, policy and legislation, and building their careers on our backs. I know that that sounds simplistic, so let me add, it's not just our choice to use drugs that maintains the treatment and harm reduction industry, it's also the prohibition of currently illicit substances that maintains this status quo. And I would hope that all of us here tonight understand that the war on drugs is a social construct defined by centuries of socio-political prejudices and power plays, and that the prohibition of certain substances is deeply rooted in sexist, racist, colonial notions of social control, propped up by a carceral framework that causes us far more harm than any mere substance ever could. When I further reflect on my participation in and experiences at the recent Harm Reduction International Conference, unfortunately, I have the same critique of every significant conference I've ever attended. That is, yet again, the involvement of the people most impacted by stale drug policies and repressive state responses are relegated to bit parts, whilst the professional class dominates the stages and podiums, unwilling to give up their rock star status and step aside to allow us, as users of currently illicit substances, to take control of the narratives about us and to manifest less polite and more courageous responses. Of course, that's not to entirely lump the blame on the PhDs, CEOs, EDs and purveyors of BS, We as a movement of drug users also need to take responsibility for our own largely meaningless and useless responses to the drug war. Not just in conference spaces, but also generally. Why is our organising always on the terms of the institutions that cause us the most harm? This is a genuine question. Why are we so polite when people in our communities are literally rotting in prison cells and dying? Why, if we recognise that it's the state that causes us the most harm under the guise of repressive drug policy and policing, are we appealing to the very same people and institutions who create and perpetuate the misery that impacts our friends, loved ones, and comrades to solve the issues that they create? As a movement and community, perhaps it's time that we truly challenge ourselves with some difficult existential questions. Starting with, why are we letting people outside of our communities set policy and advocacy agendas? Whose interests are we ultimately working for? Does our work ultimately perpetuate and legitimize prohibition? When we honestly consider these questions, perhaps we also need to consider a change of strategy. And for example, and this is so not to discredit the hard work of everyone involved in developing the Melbourne Declaration, this is simply like a larger systemic critique. Why today, on the 26th of June, the day that the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime deems an International Day Against Drug Abuse and Trafficking, and whose stated aim is to strengthen action and cooperation to achieve a world free from drugs, are we only politely sitting here with yet another fangless advocacy document, hoping for a strategic moment when we can appeal to the representatives of the state that are responsible for the drug war to make our lives a little bit less miserable? Perhaps we need to look back at the history and origins of the drug user movement, when our power was in working outside of state structures, and consider how we reclaim and resurrect this fearless praxis. Why aren't we taking inspiration from our friends in Turtle Islands / Canada and taking proactive steps to manifest community-led safe supply in its next logical step? That is, establishing our own community-owned production programs. Why today, as a symbolic action against the annual execution of our drug user friends in China, are we not out doing guerrilla gardening and sowing poppy seeds to create our own supply of opiates? Why are we not holding clandestine skill shares and teaching each other basic cultivation and production techniques? Why are we not, at the very least, outside the embassies of various countries that systematically execute dozens of our drug user friends in the pursuit of a drug-free world? Why do we so easily accept our friends dying as a result of prohibition-induced poverty, stigma, terrible drugs, and marginalization? There are people and institutions who are directly responsible for these deaths, and they have blood on their hands. Maybe it's time we begin to hold them responsible and accountable for their actions. Because, to be honest, I just don't think that relying on karma is enough. In finishing, my takeaway from the Harm Reduction Conference was that unless we take control of our own lives and challenge ourselves to be courageous in thinking outside the narrow confines of reformism, we will never achieve any genuine and meaningful liberation. We know that we are a powerful, creative, and resourceful community. And I honestly don't think we have any excuse for this continued up.
Thank you, Nick and Ryan, for that. We will have the panel discussion now, unless the video is going to work. I don't think it's going to, is it? All right, we might just do the panel discussion then, and I'll hand the mic over to Nick Kent. Oh, no. Sione, are you going to do a thing? No, okay. Maybe you go first. Yeah, we'll do the panel first. So I'll hand the mic over to Nick to introduce all of the panel members, and then we'll do a presentation from Sione afterwards. Yeah.
Back to back. Cool. Hey everyone, my name's Nick. So I work as the policy lead at Harm Reduction Victoria. Thank you so much for coming tonight for what is obviously our first event in this beautiful new space. So thank you for coming and helping warm the space up with us. So we've got a beautiful panel discussion tonight to help us continue to reflect on that big event that was the Harm Reduction International Conference. So I'll just intro you guys if you want to like come up to the stage as you get introduced, and we'll start the panel. So our first panel guest is Megan Fitzgerald. Megan is the managing, this is quite a bio. Megan is the managing lawyer of strategic litigation at the Fitzroy Legal Service. Megan has worked as a community lawyer and policy worker for 17 years in the city of Yarra and collaborates closely with the Fitzroy Legal Service Drug Outreach Lawyer Program, now in its 23rd year, in fighting for greater protection for the human rights of people who use drugs. Our next panel guest is Gabby Bruning, who's a HRVic board member, senior harm reduction practitioner at the medically supervised injecting room, and the National Ralston Award winner at the Harm Reduction Conference. We've got Sammy, who is a drug user of 35 years and been on the committees of numerous sex worker organisations. Sammy is currently on the community advisory group for the medically supervised injecting room and was a HR23 conference attendee. And Brian is a former registered nurse, lived and living experience consultant, and started as a HRVic peer networker program volunteer in 2018. Ryan now advises Barwon Health and Tandem, and also attended HR23 on a scholarship. So today is Support Don't Punish Day, and it's an important day for our communities all around the world. So as, was it Ryan before that was mentioning the UNODC, the United...
Possibly, if that's working. So this one is not working, which I could drop down.
So we want it for the video as well.
Yes, video.
So we're just not doing it now because they're all...
Let's just see, let me see if I can, where's Zoom? Did I open Zoom? Did I not click it? Am I going mad? Did I click that?
No, but you clicked it. Sometimes Zoom takes a while to open though.
That camera angle needs to be adjusted.
Yep.
Could you do that? Thank you. Excellent. It does zoom in and out as well, but it's via the lens, it's manual. Zoom has still not started on it. There it is. Oh god. That's the one big thing that make a big difference is getting a computer permanently up here that's new and good. Get us running then we can plug everything in permanently. Don't do that.
Jess wants to know if there's any way to make the lights on the stage yellow or white, or just a bit lighter because it's kind of dark.
I did turn up the brightness a little bit. I can do it a little bit more. Oh my god.
In constant contact with the criminal justice system, and people who are in constant contact with the criminal justice system often have a multiplicity of factors that are causing that to happen. And for our clients, a lot between 50 to 75% are primary homeless, 90% identify as having a mental health diagnosis. A lot of them have acquired brain injuries, complex physical health, and 50% of them are from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander or refugee background. So it's quite a specific community. Part of my work is collaborating around policy for that community, and also running strategic litigation that might improve overall outcomes for our community. So for the theme for Support Don't Punish is puts me into existential angst, actually, when I think about my community, because there hasn't been a huge amount of progress. And it's nice to be here and imagine new ways of creating solidarity and space to get involved in resistance, actually, is where I'm at.
I'm trying to think of my answer. I mean, while Support Don't Punish, it has a cause, it all comes from a good place. I think that there's a lot of catchphrases within this space, and I'm not saying that Support Don't Punish is a catchphrase, but it's kind of like, how do we actually make this happen? We can talk about all of this stuff, but then without actually changing the systems that are overarching all of the work that we do, it kind of feels like pushing shit up too much. I've been in AOD for a really long time. I have worked with clients in and out of the prison system, even in and out of child protection system, and they are systems that set people up to fail. They don't set them up to succeed. And when people talk about prisons being rehabilitation, it's like, well, how are people actually being rehabilitated? How are we setting them up to succeed instead of reoffending? But this is what is happening, and so it's great that we're talking about it, because if we don't talk about it, then awareness isn't created.
Well, as somebody within, speaking from a perspective of community and being a part of highly stigmatized, marginalized, criminalized communities, and I've had engagement, within sex work, I've done everything. I've worked the streets, I've owned businesses, I've done brothel work. So I've worked in illegal and legal settings, and the interactions with police that I have are uniquely my experience, and it's a highly privileged experience as well. Very, very privileged. And I see directly that these interactions with other people are different based on their race, where they've come from, the colour of their skin, all of those sorts of things as well. And then somebody who's used drugs from the age of 16 and was and have been an IV drug user since my mid-20s. I'm breaking the law like every single day, every time I inject. I see it as it's political. It's bodily autonomy. It's my choice. It's my right. It's my human right to do with my body the way that I want to do with it. And then community also comes down to, the people that I interact with on a daily basis as well. Those people that I have intimate relationships and as well, and what's going on there, and the criminal activities that they're a part of. And it's like putting people in prison, arresting people, having people engaged in the judicial systems doesn't help at all.
Yeah, I think I think that the initiative of the coalition of organisations that sort of coincided pretty much with the UNODC's whatever they want to call today, our ability to come together and make a decision, a collective decision to support and not punish by hijacking today and making it what we feel is necessary is highly important. And I just want to go back to I've forgotten your name, Meg, what Meg was saying about, I think that unless we give teeth to a day like today, support don't punish is just a catchphrase, and as powerful as it is in itself, I think that it's pretty important that some roots and tentacles just need to get out there to not to lived and living experience workers, are more and more part of the organisational structures of healthcare networks all around Victoria, particularly. I think that by embedding ourselves in there, that's one way that we can give agency, voice, and change some policies to act on issues like stigma and stuff like that, and talk about bodily autonomy and the ability to use a medicine, a drug, in the way that we choose to use it. I'm a two-time loser. I've been to jail twice, and both times have been related to drug use and drug abuse and the activities that I undertook to do that. And being a two-time loser at the same time, I'm not ashamed of that. It got me somewhere in each occasion, not from being in jail, and they certainly didn't set me up to succeed when I got out. The failure was there from the get-go. I mean, you couldn't even get into a quit program to quit smoking, let alone any other issues that you wanted to deal with. But yeah, I think the support don't punish needs to be a little bit more than, and if everyone that's here today, everyone who's going to embrace the ideology and the concept behind support don't punish, hijack it, make it your own, and do whatever you can in the workspace, the confines, the communities which you find yourself in, so that you can do something to change the current status quo.
Thank you so much, guys. Yeah, really well said, everyone. And I found that really interesting, or really great, Ryan, when you said, how do we give a day like this teeth? And I think, yeah, that's something we're thinking a lot about. And I encourage everyone else to think about too. And yeah, we're having lots of conversations at HRVic about how we can involve more community in campaigning and advocacy and facilitate that more. And you know, this is the first time we've held an event in this space, but there's a lot of space and a lot of things we could do with it. So yeah, that's a question that I'd pose to everyone as well. Let's give it some teeth going forward. I also just want to say it's a huge honor to be up here with you all. It's yeah, amazing to have such amazing community leaders in our networks. So thank you for being here. Another question that we've got is, again, and I like what you said, Meg, about like resisting and imagining these other worlds. I mean, I have a thought on that in terms of, like, you know, drug prohibition and the way we treat people who use drugs, and the way other marginalized communities are impacted by that treatment is really embedded in our society for several hundred years. And sometimes imagining alternatives, well, it's very difficult for people in the system to do that, clearly, and that's where this community leadership comes in. So with that in mind, support, the question is, support looks different for different people and different communities. So through the lens that you're speaking from, what could support and not punishment look like within your context?
I actually wrote a list, but the beginning point would be legalization, because it's really hard to do reform work in a framework where, like, as a service, we look at dependence for our community that we work with as a health condition, and if it's a criminalized situation for them, like, we're already at the most severe end of stigma. We're dealing with a situation where this might lap into the other question, but the other thing is that the prisons are full of people who use drugs. Like, legalization and abolition are largely the same thing, and that allows for a reinvestment into so many things that people need. In our work, like, what people want, they don't want lawyers. They just don't want to be involved with the system. So that's what our work is. But what they do want and what they do need is housing. They need to be able to access services like ordinary people. They need to be treated fucking like human beings. You know, that never changes. Like, even I can't use my privilege to bypass the stigma that people experience when they're trying to access health services or housing. And that's, you know, that's fine. I don't have that much privilege, clearly. But, you know, the consequences are devastating. So I've forgotten the question. Sorry.
So what does support and not punishment look like for you?
Testing, mate.
Yeah, it looks like housing and being treated like a human being. That's the main thing. And I think, yeah, that's
all my words.
Testing.
That's totally fine. But as you were talking, looking at the sign, health rights, human rights, that's what it is. People having human rights, being able to live the lives that they want, and without discrimination, without stigma, and accepting that people happen, and that, hey, when you all the time, but why is it suddenly why can't we just accept it? Why should some of them be illegal when other things that should be? acknowledging that this is Aboriginal land, that Aboriginal rights have been taken. That, you know, we still have to fight every single day along with everyone else, or like people using drugs still have to fight every single day just to be recognised for who they are, what they bring and where they are. And, you know, doing that, like we are all human, we are all equal, we all bleed the same. Based on our demographics, on our culture, what we do. So that's what it looks like for me.
Yeah. I think colonisation has a lot to answer for a lot of things. But in terms of like services, like and like decrim, I don't think it goes far enough because, you know, we have the victim view or lens of the drug user, and then we demonise the drug dealer or people who are trafficking drugs. And you know, so for me, I think decrim needs to go much further than what it does. And in terms of like ratios of, oh, you can have an ounce of weed, but you can only have 0.25 grams of heroin on you for it to be like, you know, without being arrested or whatever. That's bullshit. I'm running around with way more than that every fucking day. But in terms of services, I think like a place like EMSA can really extend the health services, the housing services, so people can go to a place. You know, some people have very chaotic lives and are dealing with a lot, with homelessness, with intersectionality, and you know, we talk about shame and, you know, like, you know, as this external force, you know, like people look at me and, you know, and as like see me through the lens of, you know, shame and stigma, and sure they do, and they see me through the lens of, you know, the intersectionality of a sex worker and a drug user and, you know, all of that as well, but what in my experience in services is, well, one, a lot of services definitely shame and stigmatise people and disempower people who admit, like I did a proposal around doctors and the delivery of service to people who use drugs and then disclose their drug use to doctors, and then that interaction, what that experience is like, and it's not a good one. So it teaches people to actually stay silent, and then it further internalises shame and stigma. And I see within my community a lot of people who have so much internal stigma and shame that doesn't belong to them. It's got nothing to do with them whatsoever. This is something that's being taught to them to believe about themselves, and it's a false narrative of who they are or who I am. So I think like the delivery of services in all areas and institutionalising people because of their drug use doesn't work either. Yeah. Oh, and like, you know, this whole idea of like, you know, treatment for, you know, people who use drugs. Let's put them on methadone or Suboxone, or, you know, like let's give people these really toxic drugs that are so addictive and they can't get off them. It's like nearly impossible. I mean, Hitler produced methadone, like seriously, and we give this to people to treat their drug use. Like, fuck off.
Yeah, I agree. Hitler didn't have supply of opium and couldn't get access to the poppies, and his soldiers needed it. So he got his monster military scientists to come up with something else, and we're living with the legacy of that. But in terms of what it looks like in community support, don't punish for me. I've been privileged enough to be involved with the building of a new health service, a combined health service in Geelong over the last few years, and unfortunately, the only reason that project, I'll tell you about the project in a sec, but the only reason that project came around was because of the correlation and the relationship between mental health and drug and alcohol services and how that's funded within Australia and the state of Victoria. And we not recently we had a Royal Commission into mental health services, and the state government so humbly and very, very proactively decided to take on all 46 recommendations of that the Royal Commission, and they've been throwing money out left, right and centre. Anyone's got an idea, they'll do it, but in terms of the drug and alcohol sphere, I became a part of this project. It's called the Hub Project. There's going to be 5 of them in Geelong. We're building the first one now, and it's designing a mental health and drug and alcohol service from the ground up, right down to lighting, corridors, being snaky and windy, having peers to greet you at the door to bring you in. So if you've got the balls on whatever day it is to get there and you want help, not to be met by someone behind a glass wall who's going to turn around and say to you, can I help you, whatever, and you just think, oh fuck, no, this is too much, I'll catch you later. And so, we're playing around with word semantics of, peer engagement, peer liaison, and those sorts of things. And we're trying to get people, once they've gotten to the door, bring them through the door. Or if they're inside the door, to keep them inside the facility, not because it's a facility and we need to lock you up or we need to give you some form of treatment against your will, but you've come there willingly asking for help. And I think that those people should be commended. And the concept is of collaborative design. So working with the mental health model of care delivery, as well as the drug and alcohol model of care delivery, needle and syringe exchange programs, where they're situated, where the opiate substitution therapy doctors are working so that they can't see someone who's gone into the needle and syringe exchange to get a 5-pack or a 10-pack, whether it be for them or for someone else, and then, next minute they go to their doctor to get their next prescription and find out that their takeaways have been cut because they've been seen. Now, that's a breach of privacy and a breach of trust. They saw something that was privileged and they've gone and used that against you. So I think as part of the philosophy, there was 3 of us in a room with so 2 drug and alcohol related, me with mental health issues as well, and a former sex worker, and a community supporter who was representing the mental health aspect. And between us and the 2 people from the Lived Experience Network, we sort of dreamed the dream and were shocked to think that we could actually get some shit done. And at the moment, I think we're in stage 3 or 4. It's coming along. It's not finished, and even when it's finished, it's going to be refinements and retuning and stuff like that. But I think it's just by trying to embed ourselves wherever we can so that we can support and not punish people, encourage and not deter people, and bring them inside the room, and so that they can have a say and be a part of what their life is going forwards from that point on. So.
Thank you, everyone. Interesting to hear the mental health reform stuff come up. We're going to hear from Sione later on, but it's something that's been consuming a lot of time at HRVic, with this acknowledgement by the government of lived and living experience in the mental health system, and then kind of acknowledging that, or in the AOD system on the side of that, and then the living experience peers within harm reduction Victoria kind of being tagged on again to that. So there's a lot of changes happening around how they support peer workers and stuff, or how they try and support peer workers, I guess. But it's all still very much just rolling out, isn't it? And later on you'll hear about opportunities to be further involved in like HRVic's work and strategies and thinking as we go forward. And I just want to name that because there's a lot of changes still floating around and a lot of opportunity to influence things, I think.
There needs to be more peer workers in this space as well. There's not enough, and there are some people who work in this space and are just like patting themselves on the back, like, look what a good job I'm doing. And it's just like, no, that's not what it's about. And I just want to also say, like in terms of services like housing and homelessness and the housing providers and, like social housing, and they're putting people into these, social housing, and we've housed them, but nobody's looking at the way that those tenants are being treated in those spaces. It is appalling. It is absolutely disgusting. And those services, those housing providers need to be defunded and stripped and restarted, because there's just so much abuse coming from the housing providers to tenants.
Can I say, yeah, there's big money involved in providing this social housing, and parts of development programs for apartment buildings and stuff like that. They all have to have a requirement of a certain ratio of social housing within them, and that's just a piecemeal approach. It doesn't solve anything. And when people, your neighbours, know that you're a social housing tenant, as opposed to someone who's managed to come up with $60,000 or $70,000 for a deposit and then got a job to service a mortgage and all the rest of it, you're treated like shit, and you're looked at and even if you do have the money to come up with, however you've come up with it, to buy a plot of land, put a house on it and build there, you're still not looked at the same way. I've quite literally and was openly called, that my house had destroyed the amenity of the street. And I thought, well, if that's all it takes to destroy the amenity, there wasn't much to begin with. So if they only knew what I did in my spare time.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to try something here, testing out our tech capacities. We have another panel speaker joining us digitally, we think, we hope. And so
I'm Nick. You can hear us on here, brother.
Awesome. Yeah. So I'd like to. Great, we got you, Eddie. I'm going to introduce Eddie, who is a peer worker at Nawala Willambong, the Aboriginal Alcohol and Other Drugs Service. So thanks for joining us, Eddie. And I guess I'll throw one of those questions to you as well. So my laptop died, one sec. So Eddie, first question, back to you, man. Support Don't Punish Day is an alternative to the International Day Against Drug Abuse and Illicit Trafficking. I put those ones in inverted commas. How does this theme of support don't punish relate to the communities that you're a part of?
Yeah, well, pretty heavily, Nick. Like at the end of the day, where I am, it's majority like First Nations people. Like we support one another, but the reality is it's from a 12-step based program, because it's done by the colonists. So, the oppressor's the one running the fucking show, to be honest, mate. And this is what, like, even within my own organisation, like, I'm afraid to speak. I can speak to my boss and certain people, but if I was to be even just used occasionally in their eyes, like, I wouldn't be fit to do the work that I do. So it's really hard, mate. Like, I don't even know who's in the audience, who's listening. I don't know. Sometimes things get back to people, and to give you like a small example, because it's all done from an abstinence point of view, how are we supposed to move forward? How are we even supposed to get the recognition as, like, okay, finally we've got our lives on track to a point where, how would you put it, they're manageable. Like, I'm stuck on methadone, brother, because of pain management, and I'm on 7 milligrams now. Everyone in the audience probably knows very well how little that is. I have to take Indone to go do physio twice a week. I have to bend my arm after being a victim of crime and smashed in with a abdominal bat. And so I'm just trying to get my range of motion back and to live as a normal human being and a functioning member of society, a contributing one at that. I'm still treated like a fucking shit cunt. Sorry for my language, but that's how I feel. That's exactly how I feel.
Yeah.
And it hurts me, but, we're in 2023, but we've still got blinkers on, yeah? We've still got blinkers on. And don't get me wrong, like, when people are ready for whatever kind of treatment, and a lot of brothers and a lot of sisters that abstinence is the only way because they cannot manage. But having said that, there's so much trauma that you got to understand that sometimes people need something to get by, and if that's going to make their day that little bit better just to get by, fucking why not? What's wrong with us? Why do we have to put such a price on it?
Well said, Eddie, and thank you so much for sharing. Yeah. So in case you're wondering, brother, it's all friends in the room here. It's a pretty small crowd, and it's all of our nearest and dearest HRVic family. So it's a safe space to be sharing, and we really appreciate everything you do and your kind of wisdom and perspective.
Much love, Nick.
Yeah, we talk a lot about, I guess we talk a lot about decolonization and all this country saddling up to its history and stuff like that, but it's the people with the experience on the ground and the experiences being in community that need to be listened to. And I guess when you've got as much rich lived experience as the folks do on this panel, including yourself, Eddie, we need to be listening to you and keep listening to you as we go forward as Harm Reduction Victoria and as any drug user in Victoria. So I hope this is just the beginning of some of these conversations about how we can learn from you guys and build our work to support you. Eddie, if you want, man, I can throw the same question that the other panelists had as well, which was, one sec, I think it was support looks, I mean, you've sort of touched on this, Eddie, but if you feel like it, feel free to expand. Like, the question is that support looks different for different people in different communities. So through the lens that you're speaking from, what could support, not punishment, look like within your context?
I guess it would be around, like, really being truly client-led and client-centered, like, if we really stop to listen, then maybe I reckon we're on the right track. But sometimes we're so caught up in wanting to get our point across that we're not always hearing, from, and I'm talking about, like, in my space, from my clients, like, and I've got a lot of love for all of them, and no matter what they want to do, I'm there for them, and if someone fucks up and when I say fuck up, that's because that's what the organisation calls it. If they muck up and they come back and they've breached their time and whatever it might be, and they're supposed to, they want to come back in, and it's a cold night, it's raining out there, I'm not going to turn my back, brother. I open that door, and it costs me my job, but and I'm lucky that I work for an organisation that I feel most of the time like I'm supported really well. But I often wonder where, like, you know, if we play a different tune, will we still get funding? You know, and without that funding, we've got nothing. So let's be real here, guys. You know, it's about the cash too, yeah. So support looks like that for me.
Yeah, thanks, Eddie. Yeah, that's actually maybe a bit of a segue into, we're going to hear from Sione shortly, HRVic CEO, to talk about some of the work that we've been doing at HRVic, trying to build up our, like, I guess just a bit more of a clear stance on what we want to see in terms of change, particularly like policy change. You know, I'll let Sione speak to this more, but we've developed some stances on things that we did a sort of semi-soft launch on at the conference with those demandment T-shirts, and a bunch of us worked together on a declaration at the conference as well, that's sort of aiming to start the conversation about what proper systemic decolonising drug law reform looks like in Victoria and Australia, or so-called Victoria and Australia. We'll have them up on the screen, I'm pretty sure, shortly once Sione is speaking. But I just want to note that they're so far from finished. Like, they're just things like decriminalise all drug use and possession and expand harm reduction services. And we've got one in there around community regulated legalisation, which is something we want to explore more and think about and maybe build a bit of a, to use my nerdy language, like
Oh, well, that's just it. Like, the systems are sick. The institutions are institutionalising people, and people at the top are making a lot of money out of everyone else. But also, it's like, you know, like, I don't think anything is safe. Like, you know, when we're like, I've been a youth worker and I ran a drop-in centre for young people, very marginalised young people. thrown out of home, young people, people whose families didn't want anything to do with them. And so, you know, the service that I would provide was around like safer, because I don't think anything's safe. There's no such thing as safe sex. It's safer sex. It's how do we provide a safer space for people? How do we provide safer, you know, educations to people? You know, and you know, so many people, especially within the youth space, so many people is like freak out, you know, oh, you know, this young person's using drugs, or this young person is like slashing themselves. And it's just, you know, and I would have a conversation with that person around their behaviour and what they were doing, you know, for example, like in terms of self-harm and providing a safer space. It's like, well, how? You know, how are you doing that? How are you accessing? What are you slashing? You know, what are you cutting yourself with? Oh, I'm picking up glass at the bus stop. Well, you know, that's not great. But, you know, like, how can we provide safer space to people and dismantle the patriarchy?
Yeah, I think as an academic thing, I've written a few white papers, and one of them was on the peer network program itself, and the state government, they thought that rather than that they could fix something by changing the law which prohibited someone from a non-authorised person to be giving out needle and syringe equipment to third parties. That was illegal and had been illegal up until, I believe, from memory, 2021, August 2021 or something like that. And I felt that the peer network program had a hell of a lot more to provide to the community, and was a rich source of data and information that could help policymakers a lot more than a narrow perspective that they had. Props to HRVic that they instituted the peer network program and kept it running. Even in the transition period, after the amendment to the legislation was enacted, which meant that, you could grab an extra 10-pack for someone else and give it to someone, without fear and the repercussions of walking down the street with, extra syringes on you, and then the cops, just not liking the way that you look, or the suburb that you're on, or the street corner, or whatever, the colour of your skin. And that's easy for me to say, I'm a cis white guy that, I've got no place to be. I'm privileged. I think that I wrote a white paper that made it to the minister's desk, the health minister's desk, and I got a nice letter back to say, yeah, that's great, that's fantastic, thank you very much. But that's all it was. There was support from the academic unit that belonged to, which was part of global crime and drug trafficking. And, the teacher, she had connections because she's worked in the industry for 15 years and had intergovernmental contacts within the health department. So she was able to push the envelope and get that there. But in the end, it turned into nothing. It was just, thank you very much, that was good, move on. And I think that, experts and like what is an expert and an expert witness, we're fucking experts. I don't think that there'd be anyone more qualified to talk about what needs to be written into legislation, and they can put it in fancy words, and subsection this and paragraph that and whatever else. But we're the ones that need to be writing and making it a self-fulfilling prophecy so that we change where we are now moving forward, so that we can harness, take hold of our destiny and change things for the better, for not just us but for all those that come after us, and having thanks and stood on the shoulders of those who came before us. So yeah, so I'll go.
Can I say something as well? Yeah.
Yep. Have the final word, then we're going to give you Sione.
I just wanted to say that with the whole lived experience movement in specifically, and occupying spaces of consultation within big departments, it's really challenging for those workers, and I think we need to be really wary of how much progress we're going to make when we're sitting within a superstructure that's inherently built to oppress and alienate and stigmatise us, and how we're going to survive that as people. And I think it's really important for us to have spaces and networks of solidarity with each other so that we can stay strong in the struggle. And I also need to, when I was working on Veronica Nelson's inquest, I worked with Auntie Vicky Roach, who'd done significant time in Dame Phyllis Frost Centre, and I said that I'd read something out, so I'm going to read that out, which was part of her evidence. And she's, I think, the first lived experience expert who has had that intersectional experience. And she said, my story can be regarded as a stereotypical story of an Aboriginal woman in prison, including how you get there, or maybe a stereotypical story of an Aboriginal woman during occupation, colonisation and genocide. We're in jail for breaking a white man's law who has no right to be making this law anyway. Our law should have been the dominant law in this country, which is why they plead terra nullius, so they can make their own laws and outlaw us. It's like we're refugees on our own country, on our own land, hunted by coppers, and we remember how our ancestors must have felt as we lived through it. They say history is written by the victor, but we have to make our story so big it can't be written out of history. And I feel like Vicky's words are a call to all of us to make our story big, because we're not reduced to one thing. We have complex lives, and we're living in a very oppressive, stigmatising system.
There's a difference between land, origin, respect, elders versus LAW. So law versus law, eh?
Definitely. Yeah. Thank you, Eddie. Yeah, and thank you, panelists, very much for sharing your wisdom and your perspectives, and yeah, helping us start this conversation at this new space on stolen Wurundjeri land. I'd like to welcome up Sione Crawford, the CEO of Harm Reduction Victoria, who's going to speak about some of the stuff we've been working on and some of the stuff that happened at the conference as well.
I couldn't hear you. I couldn't hear a lot of that. Well, that's not true. It was just a bit low. But thank you. I'm going to sit down. That was great. Thanks a lot to everyone that's spoken tonight. And as Meg said when she first started speaking up here, it's given me a bit of existential angst. Of course, I've had. I want to thank Nick for the for her reflections on the conference and on drug user organising in general. We've had a lot of conversations about stuff like that, and well, what I'm going to speak to now, I suppose, is it's not going to go a long way towards changing things in that respect, but I think that the stuff that Nicolette spoke about, the stuff that a lot of the other speakers spoke about as well, are the things that at Harm Reduction Victoria we've been sort of wrestling with and trying to think through, what our role is in terms of making change, and also freeing up space for others to speak and others to make change around things, or be part of making change around things that at this point in time our organisation either can't do or is choosing not to. So with that little proviso, I'll talk a little bit about, I won't speak long, but I'll speak really quickly about the Harm Reduction Conference and a couple of things that we want to do moving forwards. And it's mostly just going to be flagging stuff for you guys to look out for, hopefully, because we're in the process of trying to think through what we're going to do. And I guess what we're basically asking for is for support and engagement from people who are interested. And if you're here on a Monday night listening to, at HRVic talking about support, don't punish, and harm reduction and drug user organising, then I think that you're probably our core people. So for those of you who don't know, my name's Sione. I'm someone who uses drugs, have been for a very long time, and at the moment I'm the executive officer here at Harm Reduction Victoria. And when, as sort of Ryan mentioned, the Harm Reduction Conference first approached was bidded for by a consortium of other partners, so ABLE, our national organisation, Peak organisation, and a few others, including ASHA and NSU. That was supposed to come in 2021, and all the bidding and stuff happened. It's a bit like the Olympics. It's pretty stupid. You have to kind of, be competitive and show off your city and show how engaged your city is, and the people in your sector and your community are engaged in harm reduction. And I basically felt guilty when Melbourne won, because the people we were up against were in South Africa, and it felt like really that was probably a place that was a bit riper and needing a harm reduction conference, an international harm reduction conference, regardless of how you think about those things and how useful they are. I think they were really disappointed not to get it. So I felt a bit ambivalent all the way along, to be really honest. But once Melbourne was chosen as the city and Harm Reduction Victoria was chosen as the local partner, well, we were the local partner, because we're the local organisation of people who use drugs, we sort of had to have a think about what we were going to do with this opportunity. And really the Harm Reduction International, what they overarchingly wanted was, for us to engage with them on making the conference as safe as possible for people who use drugs, for the delegates, for people who use drugs who come from overseas, and also for local people who use drugs who access the conference. So some of the stuff that we did along the way was, did harm reduction outreach at the conference. We coordinated with the local community who had a hotel room where people could do things safely as possible. We helped organise a health service for pharmacotherapy, so that sort of service provision stuff. And I think that's one of the things about Harm Reduction Victoria and the drug user organisations that we've sort of slid into over the years, to be really honest, is that to kind of maintain funding, we've become organisations that provide services to our community, as well as hopefully do advocacy and policy work. But that policy and advocacy work is very seldom, if ever, funded. So we get funded to do this service delivery work ultimately. And it's hard work, and it takes a lot of time and energy from the organisation. It means that sometimes, we don't do the other stuff, the advocacy, the policy work, the agitating, the outside track stuff, rioting, doing marches and that sort of thing, which we really could genuinely, I think there's a section of our community who genuinely want us to do more of that. And so we've sort of have this sort of, I guess, existential angst about how we are going to move forwards. Do we do inside track stuff that seems piddling around the edges of stuff like decrim, and are we going to have, are we going to be able to remove the 3 strikes thing from decrim, but really basically everything still remains the same, and then the government gets to call that a massive victory, and we sit around going, nothing's really changed fundamentally for people on the street, so to speak. Do we do that kind of inside work and hope that things over time will change, or do we do outside? And I think that the reality is that as we move forwards, we probably we need to support and and open up opportunities for networks of people, for solidarity networks, as Meg was talking about towards the end there, to be able to do some of that more outside track work. Like, how can Harm Reduction Victoria support and engage and make that happen? How can we use what our privileged position basically of being funded to help make that happen and succeed and support organisations to do that themselves, given that often we're restricted. And at the moment, you know, the fact is that's something that would be really tricky for us to do without a lot of thought. Having said that, we are putting some thought into how we can also do that. So the Harm Reduction Conference was frankly a way to kind of start thinking about all that stuff. And the opportunity that we had really was to try and centre people who use drugs in the conference, number one, and then think about how we could centre Harm Reduction Victoria in the minds and the sort of in front of mind for, I guess, the Victorian government, the mental health minister, but also the community around Australia and around the world in terms of harm reduction. It was an opportunity for us to really try and put ourselves forward and be seen as hopefully as leaders and as people who contribute to our area, to our community and to our area. And one of the reasons we sort of decided to go ahead with having a declaration is we really just got asked, do you want to have a declaration by the Harm Reduction International people? I think it came up a bit like that. And as Nick said, we've been working on these demandments, on these advocacy on this advocacy platform that we really wanted to, and that working on the advocacy platform allowed us to kind of hone down some of the key kind of messages that we wanted to move forwards on and fight for over the next few years. But as Nick said as well, it's not finished yet. And so really one of the reasons that we kind of agreed to go ahead with this Melbourne Declaration and have a couple of workshop sessions during the conference was really in a way to get down some of those inside track thoughts, frankly, onto paper and try and get a consistent message that a number of the organisations like the peak organisations in Victoria, some of the other services, so really that stuff, the sector kind of people would have something that we could use that we had developed together ultimately, and was something that we could potentially hold up as a bit of a document and a resource and a foundation for us to use for advocacy, like inside track advocacy over the next period of time. Whereas the demandments were kind of Harm Reduction Victoria's starting points for policy and advocacy, again in terms of inside track, but also potentially to be used in other ways as well. So events, protests, whatever, with the community as well. Those things are we don't have a really clear roadmap for that yet. And I suppose that's the next thing that I was going to talk about, is that right now at the moment we're developing a new strategic plan for the organisation, and over the next period of time there'll be hopefully opportunities for people, well, there'll definitely be opportunities, and hopefully people will take them up for members and for people who use drugs in particular to engage with us on defining like what our strategic goals are for the next few years, and we'll be doing consultations and reaching out to members, but also through other channels to get you guys and to get people that you know who use drugs in particular to be part of sort of making some of those goals, but also talking to us about how you think we should be pursuing those goals and what you think we should be pursuing, or what are the things that are most important to people who use drugs in Victoria at the moment, so that we can start making to basically be given permission via the board and therefore our community to kind of chase forwards on certain things. So those opportunities will start coming up over time, and we're hoping, as Nick said, to do more events and more, this is a bit of a dry run for doing events and seeing like what goes right, what goes wrong, and working out how the space can be used really for community. We don't want this to just be a Harm Reduction Victoria space. We'd really like it to be a space for community to organise through and to utilise both the meeting spaces, but also our our kind of photocopy or whatever. One of the reasons that we're really proud and really happy to be co-located with Vixen, Victoria's sex worker organisation's peer sex worker organisation, is because for the reasons that Nick in particular, but others were talking about as well, in that the solidarity between oppressed communities like ours is really important, and really we need to really build strong links, and we want to build those links more and more, and increase the links that we have with the community as well. Because as people have been saying, all the way through tonight, the superstructures that surround us really work against us being able to make change and make changes that we want to make, and we get sucked in very, very easily and quickly into going for incremental change, going for a little inside track stuff, and that might be the right thing sometimes. I think Nicolette would never believe would never agree that that's the right thing to do, but sometimes it's the only option we have. But I think that if we can build on energy and excitement and enthusiasm in the community for actually, making change, calling some of these people to account, we'd love to be in a position to kind of support that, allow other people to do that sort of stuff, and potentially, if we're able to, within our kind of, financial restrictions or whatever, and our funding restrictions, if we're able to sort of to engage in that kind of work as well, we'd really like to. So I guess the summary is that Harm Reduction 23 was a really good opportunity for us to think through some of the stuff that we want to do in the future, but we know really well that we have to talk to the community and get your guys' engagement in that if we're going to be energised enough to move forwards, and if we're going to be able to energise, hopefully, the community. That engagement really needs to build, and I hope that this is just the start of that, and then we have a number of these sort of events, and hopefully a bit more interactive as well over the next few months and years. So thanks heaps for coming tonight and helping christen the building, yeah, thanks.
That's it. Thanks everybody for coming. There's heaps of food left, so please feel free to eat more. Sorry, online people, you don't get any. But yeah, that's all we've got. Thank you, everyone. Thanks to all the panel members for coming and speaking.
Yeah, I think so.